Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with Elaine Lynn Herring. Hi, Elaine.
I am so delighted to be here with you.
Thank you for being here. I'd like to just take a moment to introduce Elaine. She's the author of Unlearning Silence, which is an incredible book, How to Speak Your Mind, Unleash Talent, and Live More Fully. She's a facilitator and a speaker. She works with organizations and individuals to build skills in communication, collaboration, and conflict management. She's worked on 6 continents and facilitated executive education at Harvard, Dartmouth, Tufts, UC Berkeley, and UCLA. Some of her clients include American Express, Google, Nike, and the Red Cross. Her research interests are vast. They include unlearning silence, speaking up, and how race, gender, and non visible identities influence negotiation. Thank you so much for being here, Elaine.
Oh, I
I
can't
can't
wait.
tell you how much I have enjoyed listening to your
Hmm.
book. And I'd love to hear your personal story
Mhm.
and how this idea of unlearning silence came to you.
I've been telling multiple versions of the story, so this is a little bit of a choose your own adventure. There's the professional business side of it. I've been in leadership development for more than a decade, teaching those skills for negotiation, difficult conversations, and feedback. And despite those tools and frameworks that my colleagues at the Harvard Negotiation Project created, I believe being sound, some people after training, workshop learning, still don't negotiate, still don't have the difficult conversations, still don't give or receive feedback. And so I started to wonder why. Why is that? Simultaneously, the advice that I've always gotten, being an immigrant from Taiwan to the United States, is speak up, as if it's just that easy. If you're not being heard, it's you. You need to have more courage. You need to have more confidence. You need to speak louder or softer or fill in the blank. And I found that advice, as much as I love Nike, just do it, I found that advice wholly unsatisfying and at times irresponsible. Then there is my own personal story of being the youngest daughter of an immigrant family, growing up in the Christian church, very much told to be seen and not heard, to turn the other cheek, to be the bigger person, in the backdrop of patriarchy means that I'm not supposed to talk back to my elders. I'm not supposed to ask questions because I'm supposed to defer to their wisdom. So I have a really strong learned silence. And also with that realization of not only have I learned silence, but I've benefited from it. So often on our teams and on our communities, even our interpersonal relationships, you are rewarded for staying silent, not just not pushing back and saying something, but frankly, denying your own needs. Silencing your own needs to prioritize other people means that you are easy to work with, that you're a good team player, and that works okay, or we tell ourselves it works because we get external validation, right? You get to stay in the relationship, you get to stay on the team, you might even be promoted until you're told that you lack leadership ability.
Mhm.
But what's missing in that is you. Your own needs, goals, hopes, desires, the core and center of who you are and who you could be or you were meant to be. And so I took that awareness of silence. If it's something we've learned, it also means it's something we can unlearn. And the book is very intentionally titled Unlearning, ing silence, because it is not a check the box once and done activity, right? Someone asked me the other day, so how did you unlearn silence? As if I have already unlearned it. And I'd said, no, it's unlearning, ing, ongoing, because when someone who reminds me of my father says something, I still flash back to being 16 and I have to coach myself, engage with mindfulness of what is different, what assumptions am I holding, what am I choosing going forward.
Wow. So it was a multifaceted experience that led you here. Was there one story that really like struck you, an
Mm.
experience for you where you thought, I'm going to turn this into a message and make this into a book?
I wish I had the audacity to say, "I'm gonna make this a message, I'm gonna turn it into a book." I mean, this is the thing about using our voices, it can feel so clear in retrospect or from the outside, but internally, it's incredibly messy because we're human. So I did have a pivotal moment. The moment takes place between the side of our house and the garbage cans. Because I was taking out the recycling probably. It is 2020, 2019, 2020. I had a newborn, I was breastfeeding, 2020 because George Floyd had just been murdered. My father was undergoing chemo, and there was this little thing called the pandemic with COVID. And the message I heard was, "If you're not out on the streets protesting, then you're a bad person. Then you're not using your voice." And I looked at my own life circumstance and said, I am nursing this child. I'm trying to protect my family with compromised immune systems. I do care deeply about racial justice. The physical location of where I am cannot be the determinant of whether I'm a good or bad person, right or wrong, or using my voice. And also that culturally, right, coming from this Taiwanese American family, we were told, keep your head down, work hard, don't be visible. And if that's the only way to use your voice, how can I reconcile that with the culture that I came from, the culture that I'm in? And that was the moment that really crystallized. It's actually not just about just speak up. It is we've gotta wrestle and reckon with the role that silence plays in our lives. By the way, we didn't make silence up. It's not just in our heads, the people around us continue to silence us as well with their reactions to what we're talking about, maybe their silence to what we're talking about, the lack of engagement, and of course, the systems that we're all part of, the backdrop of our lives, the policies and practices that we all intersect with support some people and silence other people. And so, if we're really going to talk about living fully, which to me is impact and getting to use your voice, we need to wrestle with silence in all those facets, not just a go fix yourself message.
Mhm. And what was it about that experience when you were in the pandemic and taking out the recycling? What snapped? What was the aha for you? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, the aha was people have gotten experts who say just speak up, have more courage, have more I think they've got it wrong. And so it was this hypothesis of, is silence a thing? And as I tested it on myself, with clients, in groups that I was speaking in, it resonated, which is what helped me think, oh, it's not just me. It's not just in my head. The book came about because at the time I was part of, I was the only non white partner at a global leadership development firm. The firm was founded on the back of our founders writing 2 communication books, and they were near retirement, and from a business standpoint, if we didn't have new content, the firm would run out of things to sell, and no one else seemed to be creating content, so I decided to give it a go even though it wasn't, quote, unquote, "my turn" in terms of seniority. But same thing, it was, I may want to write a book, but no one may want to buy it or read it. And figured, well, let me give it a go. The worst thing that can happen is someone says no, but at least I will have tried. And the opposite happened, which is my agent went out with the proposal and these calendar invites started showing up. And I was like, what are these? And she said, if publishers are interested, you do a sort of meet and greet call where they talk to you to make sure you actually know what you're talking about. They wanna get a sense of what you might be like to work with, and more of these calls started popping up on my calendar. I met with 16 publishers, all who were interested. At some point, the conversation turned. Instead of them vetting me, I got a pitch deck saying, "We publish Simon Sinek, and here's what we would do with your book." And I was like, "This is not how the narrative is supposed to go." I am so used to doubting myself. I am so used to thinking, and let me be clear where that doubt came from, which is I spent the majority of my career teaching content that someone else created. I got really good at mimicking what they did. And I thought my value to the world came from being a good imitation of them. It's not that anyone would actually want me, it's that they want the cheaper version, the lower rate version of someone else. And what that publishing experience taught me was, wait, there is actually something here that came out of my head and my heart that would not have existed but for the different circumstances and life experiences I've had along the way. So the book ended up going to auction. Penguin Random House bought it. Started selling translation rights. Before I'd even written the book, it was slated to be translated into Spanish and Romanian and Dutch and Thai and Arabic and simplified Chinese and Korean, and I've lost track.
I have chills just
Portuguese? Oh,
listening to that.
it
That's an
sort of like,
incredible story.
I can't I can't I don't really believe it, even though the book is now out and I'm headed to London tomorrow to promote the UK version, and the Spanish
Wow.
version comes out April 11th. What is fascinating to me is the deep resonance of this topic. It started as a business book of how what undermines our teams, and I ended up going with Penguin Life as the imprint within Penguin Random House because their whole mantra is big ideas that change the world. And when we looked at it, they're like, it is a business book, but really you can't have intimacy in your personal relationships. You can't be loved if you have to silence yourself or feel silenced by the very people you're supposed to be closest to. Right? This fundamentally is about, do we get to be human? Do we get to feel the
And we're
full
really
range?
I am hearing that theme a lot in
Mhm.
partnerships where and I've noticed it more with women where they're
Yes.
just feeling like they're not allowed to
Yep.
talk about their emotions, to be free about what's going on,
Yep.
and they're feeling trapped and restricted.
Yeah.
And I
Completely.
often see that with a lot of women. And when I started reading your book, it was like I just wanted to cry through like the first 3 chapters because it resonated so deeply. And I work with a lot of women who, they're just really choked up and it's hard for them. And
Yeah.
we're talking about women who are empathic and
Mm.
gifted and creative and sensitive and have so much to offer, but they're so afraid. And so, just like you said, that it's not just speak up and speak
Mm.
louder and be what if somebody is truly afraid to speak their truth because they haven't been well received and
Mhm.
they've gotten pushback and they've
Mhm.
gotten criticism and
Mhm.
judgment and
Mhm.
gaslighting, like you're wrong. What are you
Oh,
talking about? So if a woman doesn't feel safe for anybody,
yeah.
how would you coach them
Yeah.
to
Bef
start feeling that that's okay?
Totally.
Where
Before I
can they
go there,
start?
yeah,
Mhm.
I wanna highlight that it's even though women are disproportionately impacted by silence because of the structures and the norms, silence is not a woman's issue. Right? Silence is a leadership issue. Silence is a human issue. And I have been one of my greatest joys in this process is women reading the book, being like, oh my gosh, the men in my life need this because my brother can't talk with my mom, right? My husband can't talk with fill in the blank. So I like to believe that women are further along the curve at times. But what I would start with, and this is chapter 6 of the book, in finding your voice and then speaking up in chapter 7, is number 1, the awareness that it's not you, right? That fear is real, and often that fear is coupled with shame and guilt of if
Mhm.
I were a better person, if I was stronger, if I was fill in the blank, then I wouldn't have this issue. I want to be really clear. We did not make silence up. The reactions that you've lived through are real. The looks on people's faces, even right now, as we say something, that is real. They may deny it, but so often it's a corporate gaslighting thing of women, you have imposter syndrome, women, you need to fix yourself, versus we all continue to contribute to a world in which that is the dominant norm. In order to unlock, sort of crack the puzzle, we need to be able to answer the right question. And the right question is not, do you have enough courage or confidence? The right question is, what role does silence play in my life? What silence have I learned? What might I want to unlearn? Meaning, what are my operating assumptions? Do those serve me today and do they serve who I want to become? They may have served you well in the past, right? Chapter 3 is all about when silence makes sense because silence is a survival strategy, is necessary at times for self-care and self-preservation. So I want to start with the awareness of what are we really dealing with. Second, if you want to speak up, I offer 4 anchors for speaking up. And the first of those anchors, to be clear, they're anchors because speaking up is not linear. And because as we share parts of ourselves, it's like the waves of doubt and discomfort and other people's reactions that come up. So the anchors are, what do you hold on to? How can you center yourself when the waves get choppy? Because they will. So the first anchor is start with why. What's the bigger why of why you would take the risk to share of yourself? Whether that is a perspective, an idea, an identity, a passion, a calling. What matters to you more than the discomfort that makes it worth it for you to take the risk? Because it is risky. It's not about not having fear. It's not about not having any costs. It's that bigger why is worth it. Is it
And you mentioned this, that sometimes we don't even know that we're censoring ourselves. We're so used to it. We're so accustomed, we don't even think that I'm doing this to myself.
Yeah. This is one of the deep pains that I experience, which is because let's take women, are so used to being censored by other people, censoring ourselves doesn't feel all that different, except it is one thing that we could control. Right, that we could change. So what is your bigger why? Is it pushing back against inequity? Is it believing, in the value of meditation? Is it wanting to build a better future for the people who come after? What's your bigger why? And our whys are gonna be different for each of us.
And acknowledging that this is a habit we're overcoming. This
It
is
is
a
a
habit
habit.
that's ingrained.
It
We
is a habit
yeah.
that we're breaking
Mhm,
and rewiring. That
mhm.
is happening, and intentionality, and anyone who has ever tried to engage in behavior change knows that that is not a linear process. That is not a clean and happy process. That is often a messy process. The fourth anchor is embrace resistance, which to me is just to acknowledge that resistance, other people's not getting it, pushing back, defensiveness, not showing up the way that we might want, that is a natural part of using your voice. That it can be deeply painful. But knowing, "Oh, this is part of the process," when it happens, it's like, "Oh, there it is," right? That's what's happening,
Would you
rather than it
say
disorienting us as much.
right, I mean, would you say that with that resistance, it would be vital to have the emotional skills to navigate through some of the really challenging, dark emotions that can come up within ourselves and others?
Absolutely, which is why to me, unlearning silence, speaking up, using your voice, whichever aspect of it you're focused on, none of it is an individual sport. It is completely a team sport, because as much as we might know ourselves, we can see each other more clearly. Who is your team? And it can feel incredibly isolating if you are the first, the few, or the only, and you look around and you're like, but there's no one who gets it. When I say team, I mean, who are the voices in your head? Who are you listening to in terms of podcast or media you're consuming? For me, LinkedIn actually surprisingly has been wonderful because in my own small geographic circle, I was the only non-white person. I was the only Asian person. I was the only person who seemed to care about equity. But being on LinkedIn, it was like, oh, there are so many people who actually care about the same things. There are actually so many people who have experienced the same fact pattern that I have in terms of gaslighting or navigating toxic workplaces. And what that does is reduce the social isolation that often comes from thinking, "Oh, it's just me," right? Our silence, there is the initial pain of whatever we're going through, the resistance, the pushback, other people's defensiveness, and then there's a secondary pain, or in the book, I call it double pain, of thinking, "I it's just me." We may or may not be able to solve for that initial pain, and hopefully over time we do, but we do have more influence over that second pain, that double pain, and that it is in community and in being seen, known, heard, that we can address the social isolation and loneliness that can be so damaging. But who is your team? And that would be, who are the voices in your life that you give weight to? Who are the people who know you and who you want to become, who can nudge you in the ways that you want to become? My best friend texts me basically every day in some variation saying, "You do you." And I'm like, "Oh, but I can't." Right? I'm supposed to be a dutiful wife. I'm supposed to be a good daughter. I'm supposed to be a mother. Where in any of those identities, and we haven't even gone to the professional, is there room for me? But that constant reminder makes me think, what would I do if I was thinking of me? And she checks in to say, "Are you sick of me saying this yet?" And I was like, "No, I clearly need it." So who's on your team? Because it's not an individual sport. We all need each other and can be that for each other.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's even like, how would you respond if somebody's angry at you? I think that keeps a lot of people
Mm,
silent. It's just the fear of somebody's anger.
yeah. And awareness is also, okay, their anger, is that about them or is it about me? Is that mine to take on? What role do I play in this? They're framing the issue as, "You're the problem," or, "You're the reason I'm angry." But is it really? And what is in that dynamic, what is my work to do? What is their work to do? And can I maintain the agency of choosing when I push back, how much I engage, doing it on my own time, in my own way, whatever that might be?
And how would you approach this if there's a predominant perspective
Mhm,
and you're the only one? Like,
mhm.
I can relate to your story because I too was the only Asian kid in a predominantly white school. I've constantly been the only
Yeah.
like female, the only minority, the only Asian. And so what can you do? And you talk about when there's no oxygen in the room because it really
Mm,
feels oppressive.
mhm.
When that kind of energy, predominant
Yeah,
consciousness is in the room, sucking up all the oxygen, you know, what how do you handle those situations?
yeah,
And especially professionally?
yeah. One is awareness that it's happening, right? Awareness of whether it's you or not. And also, my favorite question is, what do I need? What do I need in this moment? Because if no one else is caring about you or prioritizing you, self care is, what do I need and how do I try to get those needs met? On a very tactical perspective, if it's a dominant perspective that you disagree with, there's always the phrase, "I see it differently." Now, that can feel really risky because different at times gets chopped down, gets suppressed, gets othered. And if you're already othered, Nyla Merchant would tell us that anytime you're less than 15% in terms of dominant identity, you're more likely to be othered, more likely to be left out, and more likely to be doubted. So that's not something that we made up. And I would also interrogate what is in this present dynamic versus what might I be bringing in from the past in terms of assumptions, right? I see it differently is one phrase that can be helpful. The other is to invoke magic, right? If I had a magic wand, this is what I'd change. You actually get to say what you would say, but you hide under the guise of magic. And if you get resistance, it's, well, that was just in, this fictitious magical world. But you've actually already said the thing, so you've planted the seed. And the research around voice cultivation is that because so much of our work in workplaces takes place in teams, you may not get the result right away, but if you said it out loud rather than kept it in your head, it's planted a seed with someone that you cannot make go away, right?
It's
It's
created a
it's
greater awareness within
totally
the team.
totally whether or not they agree with it right away. You put that data point out there, you have fundamentally changed the data point. The third phrase I'd go to is from where I sit. Because from where I sit acknowledges that my view is legitimate because it is, right? You are a human being. You have a view of the world that is unique, particularly with distributed teams, right? If you sit in California, that's going to be a different view than if you sit in Tokyo or fill in the blank location. From where I sit recognizes the legitimacy and also the limitation of my view. So it's let me fully take up the space that is mine, which is from where I sit with the lenses of the world that I have, the identities that I hold, being new to this team or being on this team for a long time, being in procurement or being in sales or being in engineering, whatever it is. And I'm curious what it looks like from where you sit because we're putting together pieces of the puzzle. None of us are omnipotent. So, very naturally, logically, our views are limited and legitimate, just like your view is legitimate and limited. My responsibility and offering is here's what it looks like from where I sit. What does it look like from yours? And together we put together a more accurate view of the world. The mental hack that often can be helpful is to know that if you are not offering your perspective, the people around you, particularly upwards, leaders, end up with a skewed sense of reality because they cannot see what you see. To be clear, they often contribute to whether or not it is safe to speak up and to share. But for those of us who are focused on the costs or the discomfort and tend to be more collectively oriented, can think about, well, why might this be good for the whole? Which inherently is also good for me, but I can better anchor to the whole than often I can to myself.
And so let's say that you've said from where I sit and you've
Mhm.
started that conversation. What happens when, someone's talking over you? It's like you're not given that space to really vocalize
Mhm.
and someone and it happens all the time in groups where somebody just takes
Totally.
over, right? And what are some tools with that as well when somebody's just kind of taken over, taken the soapbox,
Mhm.
and what are things that we can do in that case?
Yeah, there's so many different things to do. So one of them is how can we show up for each other in that moment? So it particularly if it's a multi-group dynamic, right? You've got multiple people in the room. You notice that someone's talking over. It's really hard when you're the recipient to interject because it feels like the onus is on you. This is bystander intervention 101, right? Hey, Sura was still talking. I'd like to hear what she has to say. Or hold on, I want to hear, let's let her finish. Let's let them finish. How can we do that for each other so that it's not only on ourselves? And in doing that, we also co-create a world that I think more of us would want to be in rather than the commiseration after the meeting of, "Oh my gosh, that was so horrible. I can't believe they did that." Where were you in that moment, and how could we have shown up? There was an instance of Diane Abbott in the UK government recently, where propriety and process meant that they were talking about her, a Black woman, but never asking her what she thought, even though she stood up and tried to get the floor. There were, more than 50 people in the room. No one challenged what was going on, and her own challenges to what was happening weren't received. There's so many different choices that could have made a difference in that moment. So I'd start with, how are we showing up for each other? Who are your allies in the room, or who could be an ally? Ally is a verb based on action. The second is, how do we redesign the way that we work? Number one, we're all in meetings where none of us actually want to be there, don't necessarily know why we're there, and they're poorly designed, meaning it's a free for all. And what happens in that moment is that we default to the communication habits or preferences of the people who have either been there longest or have the most power. And it gives us a very narrow definition of acceptable voice. You have to be able to speak in real time. You have to be able to interject. You have to be able to read the room and the dynamics. By the way, please speak in three succinct bullet points with no ums and just the right amount of emotion to show that you care, but not too much emotion that you lose credibility. Versus, what communication mediums, whether talking in real time or typing asynchronously, make it easier for us to communicate our thoughts. So often in corporate spaces, in workplaces, that real time communication is prized. And what is actually a difference in wiring is interpreted as a weakness. If you can't interject in that moment to grab the floor back, then you're not as good, you're not as worthy. Versus some of us are real-time processors. We process information best by talking it out in the moment. Some of us are post-processors, meaning 20 minutes after the meeting, you can't quite figure out what to say, and then you're like, "Oh, that's what I would have said." Or you're finally taking your shower and your best thinking comes out. Wouldn't we want our best thinking rather just than the fastest or loudest thinking? And if so, how do we rework the way that we communicate, the way that we collaborate to say, okay, we're in this meeting, we've sort of come to a placeholder decision, but everybody go post process, sleep on it. As thoughts come up, put them in Slack or reply all on the email. So you're doing a couple of things. You're actively designing for differences in wiring. You are honoring the different ways that we are created. You are also making clear the avenues for how and when to offer those thoughts. And it fundamentally changes who gets heard, what thoughts come there, and lowers the barrier to entry. Essentially, what we want to do is not have as many prerequisites for being heard, that you need to be well rested. You need to be doing it in real time. And you need to essentially, in corporate America, show up as a white male.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, just to consider the way people want to process and share.
Mhm,
And I'm also thinking like if somebody is talking over you, whether it's even in just a one-on-one conversation or in a group,
mhm,
ways that we can just kind of gracefully shift that awareness.
yeah. And what is fascinating is there's just cultural differences too. So number 1 is the other person aware that they're doing it? Number 2, are they aware of the impact that it's having and how it's being interpreted? Because talking over one another could be enthusiasm, could be just normal. It's not meant to be offensive, right? So can we so this could either be taking out of the context of the interpersonal relationship, what are the norms on our team? Do we want
Mhm.
to have no interrupting or talking over each other as a norm? And then you have something to anchor to. rather than having to raise it out of thin air, which is so much more costly, right? And it's like, I don't know how this is going to be well received versus we've talked about it and we have a norm that we can reference.
Mhm.
All of that can feel like work, and it is, but not having that conversation is also work in trying to figure out, well, how does this work? And we're doing it by trial and error, and we're misinterpreting each other from the get-go. And, trust is also being eroded in the
Right.
process.
I mean, I find it hard too to just even find the gracious words to to say, because I've had friends that have just train talked, right? They're
Yeah.
just like train talking, and you're like, you just feel pummeled and and you don't. It's hard to get a word in edgewise, and especially if you're somebody who's sensitive and you're very receptive, and you're kind of taking that all in versus having that like, hey, can I talk now? Or
Yes.
what can what words, or even as a facilitator, right? Hmm.
So let's play that out, because whether or not we talk about it, that dynamic is still there. That frustration is still there. And sometimes or often, it just leaks out later or leaks out at the people that have nothing to do with it, but are closest to us. And so they get the brunt of it. And this to me is one of the biggest arguments for driving and having agency and determining how you engage with it, because we're still engaging with it, even if not actively so, even if suppressing it. So
Right.
there is the argument of sort of getting ahead of it. And if it's a friend that you actually want to hang out with, right? It's, hey, I love you. I really do want to hang out. And do you know what will make it even better? Is if we can just like pause. I just need a minute. Or I actually want to tell you about me too. And do they even realize that they're talking a mile a minute? Are they human beings are so complicated, right? Is it their awkwardness and their discomfort with silence or just habit that they don't realize the impact it's having? To me, it also, whether you say something, comes down to how much you care about that friendship, right? If you're never going to see them again, you've made up your mind, you're like, oh, not today, then okay. And why subject yourself to that if there is a different way, particularly coupled with the good intent, right? I love you, and here's what would make it better.
That's a
They can
wonderful
say
way to say
no.
that. Right. I mean, I have said something, things like that to people, and I have flat out never heard from them again. Like that's been one
Yeah.
of the so there are consequences to
Yes.
sharing what could work better for you. And so, being prepared about that too. Like what happens happens. And I would like to ask you about developing agency,
Mm,
which really reminds me of Jung's individuation
mm.
and coming into yourself and deciding for yourself. And what does that mean to have agency? How do we begin to develop that for ourselves
Yeah.
and for our voice?
Slowly, painfully sometimes, awkwardly. Um, and I say all of that because at some level, we are a collection of the experiences and the communities and the people and places that we've been. And in all of that, where am I? My own story is I sort of woke up and I was, people are like, use your voice. And I was like, I don't even know what my voice is. I don't even know what my voice is because I have spent a lifetime solving for everybody else's needs. So if anyone is there, you're not alone. I have a better idea of what my voice sounds like now. Writing a book, just me, was really interesting because I'd always co-written with people. And because they were more senior in the field, more experienced, I assumed that their voice was best practice. Like that's what it means to be effective or to be a good person. Apparently, my voice is sometimes snarky. Apparently, my voice talks about Queer Eye and Top Chef and mentions the Golden State Warriors. Apparently, it also digs into research. I have to say that I feel really conflicted when people say your book is well researched, because it is. But I am also very aware in the systems and backdrop that we operate that I have to be well researched because of the double standards for an Asian American woman in a predominantly white male category. So I share that of if you don't know what your voice is, two things. One is this question of what do I need and what do I think? And that's all internal work, which is lower risk than external work. But asking yourself, what do I think, even as you're listening to this conversation, right? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What do you see differently about it? That exercise helps remind you that you do have thoughts of your own. And the question is, what do I think? Not what does my manager think? What does my partner think? What would my mother want me to think? It's what do I? And it reminds you that there actually is a you. And then if there's the internal work and then it's taking it external. And to me, the external work is full of small experiments. Small experiments of expressing an opinion. And I would do two things. One is find low risk contexts to practice and also make your experiments time bound. Because if you say, I'm going to do this forever, forever feels really daunting versus I'm going to do it for the next 3 meetings or I'm going to try it for 3 weeks, right? Whatever it is that gets you going. And usually in that time, you get some positive data points that tell you, oh, this won't actually kill me, hopefully. In fact, I might have gotten a useful response. I might even have gotten what I needed. In the book, I talk about a story where I landed in Seattle and I was in the back of a cab and I couldn't open the window. My button wasn't functioning. And I debated for a good 20 minutes in my head as to whether to ask the cab driver to open the window because it was stuffy. And I was like, oh, okay, it's just like 30 minutes until my destination. I can tough it out. You know what? He's a complete stranger. I'm probably never going to see him again. It's pretty low risk. And then because I present female, it was, well, is he gonna get mad and, like, throw me out of the car and I'm gonna end up in a ditch? Because that is real. Okay, well, it's a crowded freeway, so probably not. The odds are in my favor. And so I finally decided to try it as an experiment, right? Like, I will experiment. The worst he can say is no. I said, "Sir, can you open the window?" He didn't say anything back. He just pressed a button. Was like, the Pacific Northwest air is really fresh and crisp. It was the most glorious fresh air ever, but that was a good 20-minute debate. I struggle less now with asking a cab driver to open the window because of that rep, but what is a low risk experiment you could try? I'm not saying start with the hardest stuff, right? But can you get some reps under your belt to build that muscle and add to your data set of, oh, it does make a difference when I say something? That could be with strangers. That could be on something you don't really care about. Like, what do you want to have for dinner? Oh, you want burgers? I really want Thai. What do you think about Thai food? And they're like, "No, I really want burgers." You're like, "Okay." But you at least have done that bit of expressing if you haven't before, right? Those are the micro movements, the small experiments I'm talking about.
Micro expressions that lead us to having authentic connection with
Mhm.
people. Because how are we going to find our people if we're not saying who we are and
So
expressing
that's
who we are?
now I'm hyper aware of talking over you. So thanks for curbing
Okay,
my
go ahead.
enthusiasm.
Go
Right,
ahead.
but
I
that's
don't mind.
exactly it, which is people don't actually know how to support us if A, they don't know who we are, really are, and also B, if we don't know who we really are. So there's that self-silencing of who am I and that experimentation to figure that out over time. But that was one of the biggest insights for me of, oh, you don't actually know how to support me. And some of it is, we're all trying to read each other, but I can actually help you read me better by telling you what I'm aware of about me, right? I am a morning person. And so 9 p.m. at night is not the optimal time for a heart to heart conversation because I'm half asleep. Okay, my partner is a night owl. We have a rule that I do not talk about serious subjects. It's not even a spoken rule, but it's something we have learned. It does not go well if we try to have serious conversations before noon. That means that we have a very narrow window between noon and 12:30 where we're like sort of both optimal. So it's amazing that our relationship has lasted as long as it has. But instead of it being a, oh my gosh, you're a horrible person, or why can't you show up, or can't you be more present? It's, oh, we know this about each other. We've shared the awareness. We can craft an action going forward that optimizes for those parts of us. But that also takes me saying, yeah, no, 9 o'clock, not prime time for me.
Right. And talking about these relationships, uh, what I find interesting, I'm in the dating realm.
Mm,
And so what I often find is that when people approach me, they see Asian woman and they think, and I can feel it, they want someone who's accommodating and easy and submissive. And
mm,
when I start speaking my mind, just like the level of reaction
mm,
is so intense
mm,
because they're already coming to me with this
mm,
desire.
mhm.
Um, and whether you want to call that Asian fetish or whatnot. And I guess I would like to not just talk about my dating life, but about being Asian American, for example,
Yeah.
a minority where there is this reluctance to assert yourself. And because of that reluctance, we're not able to, it becomes incrementally harder to be in positions of power and
Mm,
leadership and being seen and being visible.
mm.
And so how can we support,
You have so
you
many
know,
thoughts.
yeah, I mean, go at it. You go at
Okay,
it. You
number
know where I'm
one,
going.
number one, their surprise and disappointment that you don't fit into the stereotypes that they hold, their issue. Their
100%.
issue. You be you. We each get to be who we are. Unless you choose that something
Right.
else is more important to you, and so contorting yourself to fit a stereotype is something that you want to do. But I'm even thinking back to the friendship of you spoke your mind and they were not in touch. Well, good for them and good for you. You didn't have to listen to their train talk forever going forward. If the prerequisite for being in a relationship or being at having a seat at the table is to be what they want us to be rather than who we are,
Because it feels inauthentic. It
it
feels
feels
totally inauthentic.
inauthentic. It is actually
Mhm.
unsustainable. It is unsustainable. It might be okay for a short term for a tactical reason and a strategic reason, but I would argue that it's just unsustainable. Okay, then there's
You
this.
say it causes self-harm?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely, and thousands of dollars in therapy. If you can even
100%.
find
Yeah.
the right therapist, because that industry is also underrepresented. Um, I wanna go back to this piece about leadership and Asian American identity, though, because there's so much to it. There is what is our responsibility as people who carry the Asian American identities we hold, and there is what is the responsibility of the people around us to challenge the way that they see us, much like you're talking about in this dating life. That actually is a really good analogy because there is the ways that I silence myself and I've internalized assumptions and stereotypes and biases and adapted to them to survive or try to make it. And there are the ways that people actively continue to silence us, including by only viewing us through the lens of that stereotype. and that is their work to do. I know a book called Unlearning Silence that can help them do it, right? Part of why I wrote the book was because I was so tired of people asking me, "So what is it like to be Asian in America? What is it like to be an Asian American in the workplace?" And I won't say what I thought, but one of
Why
my
not
there
say what you think?
uh, so this is scar tissue.
Why not?
I can swear on this podcast.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Go fuck yourself. Okay, and now I will just to play this out, every time I curse on a podcast or in a newsletter, I get a text from my mom saying so then I have to coach myself, or sometimes it's my dad, um, because to them, cursing is still inappropriate, it's gonna not make me professional, and, like, if that's what we're all really thinking, why can't we say it? But that is my own scar tissue that I have to work through, and I'm making conscious choices, going back to the agency piece. Whereas when I've worked with the Marines, it wasn't until I dropped an F-bomb that they're like, "Oh, we can listen to her, we can play." Right? So there is a strategy to it. But um, also Asian Americans are not a monolith. So, tell me about the Asian American experience. I'm like, go Google it because I don't need to be doing that emotional relational labor for you. I've now done some of it in this book, so you can go pay $29 full price to read it, and then we can talk. So this is sort of prerequisite reading for engaging with me now. So there is what do other people do that continue to silence us, which is to put us in boxes. I want to be clear that we all silence each other. And so it is our work to do to notice our own biases and to challenge them. I'll give a concrete example. I've been doing a lot of conversations in media to help as many people know about this book, Unlearning Silence, as possible. I got a request out of Texas, and I immediately was like, I'm a Californian for a reason. I live on the coast. That is one of the places in this country that is okay for me to live in. When I go to the rural Midwest and I walk into a cafe and every eye goes to me, I just cannot do that day to day. But when I saw Texas, I was like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to do this, right? Like, what Republican shenanigan am I going to have to deal with?" And then to notice that is my assumption, stereotype about Texans. And the person who interviewed me was brilliant, so thoughtful, had read the book. We went in deep detail into the nuances, and a bunch of Texans have been DMing me about hearing this conversation. But in what ways do we expect people to show up, and we craft the narrative for how they're supposed to show up? And oftentimes, sometimes it is a matter of self-care, don't even let them in and let them be full human as well. This is a long way of saying we're not that is part of what we're fighting as Asian Americans, because as an Asian American woman, I'm supposed to be submissive or easy to work with or fill in the blank. That may be the stereotype. That does not have to be who I am. I don't have to internalize it. The beauty of, Beef coming out on Netflix was that Asians got to have a full range of emotions, fuller range of emotions. Asians got to be mad. Whereas we're supposed to stereotypically be docile and happy and submissive versus no, we are snarky. We are angry. Anger,
And we
eh,
rage.
yeah, is a normal human emotion.
Yeah.
So there is so much of I was not a big believer in representation matters. And that's my own history, but I finally got here of it does matter. It does matter that we get to, as Asian Americans, succeed in whatever industry we're in. We're not just good for our food. We're not just good as your engineers. We're not just good as your nurses, fill in the blank. Part of the pressure and the joy and the honor of getting to write this book published by the largest publisher in the world, is in a category filled with white men, is feeling the pressure of, if this book doesn't do well, then I've screwed it up for every other woman, every other Asian woman, every other Asian. And I've had to work through that in therapy with my Asian American therapist, who is wonderful, right? Team, to say, I can't take that on. But it does matter. It does matter. Yeah. The number of Asian American women who have come up to me after I speak at a conference who are like, I've just never seen anyone who looks like us on stage as the authority. And I
How do
realize I haven't either. And I bought into color blindness for a long time because that was the dominant norm I was swimming in. But that also goes back to, what do I think? What do I notice? What can I see from where I sit? In what ways can I unlearn my own silence by challenging those habits and assumptions and continue to invite, ask of, demand other people to unlearn the ways they silence us?
Wow, thank you, Elaine.
Yeah, I'm still at rage a
A
little
lot.
bit. There's so much. There's so much there, right? And the other piece I'll name, because it's not often spoken about, is how often we end up being the shadow leader anyways. I say we as Asian American women, right? We are doing the work to prop up the CEO or whoever the star player is on the team. It's our work, our labor, and we do not get the credit for it because someone else takes our work and passes it off as their own, or they're the CEO and I'm just fill in the blank, the chief of staff, or and there's utility to all of those roles and those experiences. I also don't want us to limit ourselves to say, well, that's all I can do. And I say this with compassion and with hope. Because even when you get a seat at the table, if keeping that seat means showing up as they expect, contorting yourself to fit, is that really a table you want to stay at? Part of my own journey in writing this book is that I am no longer the only non-white partner at the firm, not because there's a different partner, but because I'm no longer a partner there. The costs are real. But to protect the integrity of the book, to get to live in alignment, more in alignment with who I am and who I want to be, it was a cost. It was also not, people are like, that's really courageous to leave or to be forced out, depending on who you ask. And I was like, I don't think so. It it was a calculation, which is I have enough privilege at this point in my career, given where I've taught, who I've worked with, that I will be able to pay my bills and keep a roof over my family's head. Um, and so can I use that for good? To say the things that are really costly for more costly for other people to say because of where they're situated. But together we're co-creating a different world, a world in which we actually more fully get to be who we are, rather than just who people might want us to be, using us for our utility rather than honoring our humanity.
You, Elaine. As we start to come to, oh my
I know,
goodness.
totally. I just looked. I'm supposed to
Okay.
be somewhere right now.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. Let me wrap this up really. I
Okay.
had one more. What was that? Oh, the question that I just want to leave, and maybe we'll just leave it out there, is just that the discomfort that comes with being seen and being visible if you're
Oh,
not used to it.
yeah.
And so I just wanted to put that out there. And I don't know if you want to talk about it or we just come to a close. I
Oh,
didn't realize the time just flew.
the
What?
time totally flew.
Okay.
Can we schedule like 15 minutes another time to answer that question? Because I would love to if it's helpful
Absolutely.
for the community, and I am supposed to
Yes.
be across town right now.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
So I would
Thanks.
just like to say thank you so much, Elaine. And if you want to learn more about unlearning silence, you can go to Amazon, but you can also go to Elaine's LinkedIn account. So it's under Elaine Lynn Herring. And I just want to thank you, Elaine, for your time and your energy and your voice showing up today. Your book is just changing the world.
Mm.
It's changed my world. Thank you so much for you and your work.
Thank you, Sarah.